Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for a video that will, of course, be a part of the Poetry Discussions playlist here on the channel, but it's also part of a two-channel event, as here in September, I am posting a video every day here on Strip Cover Lit, because sometime in this month, but I'm not telling you when, sometime in this month, I turn 35 years old, but I'm still handsome. And I will also be posting a video every day on my personal channel, and I'll link a comment from my personal channel down in the comments section, so be sure to jump over there and give me a follow there as well. So that's 60 videos in 30 days that I'll be posting. But what I try to do here with Poetry Discussions, I know it's been a while, is instead of a full poetry review where I sort of give a reader's response as well as try to break down some of the literary stuff and then do a rating and recommendation based on the poem, what I try to do with Poetry Discussions, pardon me, is I try to really pick on one idea which presents itself in the poem, and then sort of go from there, just sort of riff off of that idea. And sometimes it leads a little bit astray of the point of the poem, and I think, the reason I say all this is I think that is actually maybe what's going to happen today. What we are reading is My Grandmother's Love Letters by Hart, as it appears for me in Literature, a Portable Anthology, 2nd edition. My Grandmother's Love Letters. There are no stars tonight but those of memory. Yet how much room for memory there is in the loose girdle of soft rain. There is even room enough for the letters of my mother's mother, Elizabeth, that have been pressed so long into a corner of the roof that they are brown and soft and liable to melt as snow. Over the greatness of such space steps must be gentle. It is all hung by an invisible white hair. It trembles as birch limbs webbing the air. And I ask myself, are your fingers long enough to play old keys that are but echoes? Is the silence strong enough to carry back the music to its source and back to you again, as though to her? Yet I would lead my grandmother by the hand through much of what she would not understand, and so I stumble, and the rain continues on the roof with such a sound of gently pitying laughter. First off, what a perfect opening stanza. There are no stars tonight but those of memory. Yet how much room for memory there is in the loose girdle of soft rain. I am almost tempted to ask, why go on? Why go on from there? Why write the rest of this poem? You have that stanza with the title My Grandmother's Love Letters, and we might not get the specifics of everything which is pointed out afterwards, but the poetic essence, if we are allowed such liberty with words, such liberty with language, the poetic essence of everything which follows would be right in that poem. There is often advice given to poets: if you write long poems, take off the first stanza, take off the last stanza, and you've got a poem. If you write short poems, take off the first line, take off the last line, and you've got a poem. That is obviously a crude type of advice to give, but go back with some of your poems if you are indeed a writer. Try that and just see what different types of spice present themselves through those words. There is a certain magic which is slowly erased with specificity in poetry. But what I want to talk about for this discussion really presents itself in a stanza that I'm not actually going to talk about. when discussing this poem, a line and a stanza. And I ask myself, are your fingers long enough to play old keys that are but echoes? Is the silence strong enough to carry back the music to its source and back to you again as though to her? I mean, grandmother's love letters. Yeah, I get it. I get it. But this part of the poem made me ask the question, what about our love letters to ourselves? Our goals, our dreams, our aspirations, those things we wish and want from life. Are we allowed to mourn those? Are we allowed to mourn their death? Are we allowed to mourn them are we allowed to mourn our dreams in that evening drawing ever nearer? Are we allowed to mourn for our younger selves? Let's go back to that first stanza. There are no stars tonight but those of memory, yet how much room for memory there is in the loose girdle of soft rain. Can we mourn the vigor that drove us towards a former glory, or in a former glory? The obvious and easy example are athletes. Are athletes allowed to mourn their former glory once they retire, once they're pushed out of a sport, once they have a career-ending injury, etc.? Are they allowed to mourn that former self? And if the answer is yes, which I am tempted to say that it is, and I am tempted to say that there is no one watching this who would disagree with that sentiment, or if you did, it is certainly something which would require explanation, I think, a little bit more than saying, yeah, it's okay to mourn that, right? If we were allowed to mourn former glory, are we allowed to mourn the lack thereof? Those moments in life where we did not come through? Are we allowed to mourn the death of dreams? After all, much of glory, glorious moments are those which are largely isolated by a sheen of ignorance. When we think of, for example, going back to sports because it's an easy one, think of a Super Bowl champion. For me, it's Patrick Mahomes, and it always will be. We have no idea the sacrifice that went into that. And sure, in the common parlance, we are told sacrifice happens for that, but we don't see it, except that in today's world, we have it thrust upon us, seemingly, more often even, than stories of a heroic nature. For every myth made of man story, we have a movie about his neglected daughter. For every breathtaking first, which is heroic and bold, we often get the stories of someone who could have done it first but was denied the attempt. This is a type of schadenfreude which has become zeitgeist, if I can get super German here. We're not allowed to have heroes anymore. We're really not. We're not told explicitly so. But every time we might claim one. Every time we might say that is an ideal. Someone already has a tweet ready. There's already an article on Vox ready to hit the press about whatever individual it is and whatever shortcoming they have. Which is strange, because if we never accomplish anything, our shortcomings are almost sure to stay silent. But the moment we start to accomplish something, by God, it has to be let known that someone has that shortcoming. But what I want to talk about now are these ideals for the self. Self-wrought goals and failures. The feeling that one harbors in one's own twilight. Not in death, not in night, but just after the heat of the day. So I want to read the last verse from this poem. But instead of Grandmama, because she's dead already, let's insert our former selves. Because he's dead already too. Or she. But I'm talking he, because it's me. Yet I would lead my former self by the hand through much of what I would not understand. And so I stumble, and the rain continues on the roof, with such a sound of gently pitying laughter. I think that this is self-exacerbating. I think that this is self-admittance. This is a rumination on the fickle nature of will. Not the will to power, for sure, if we're going back to German phrases. Will zur Macht, is that it? The will to power? But this is all too, I believe, all too self-assuring. A stanza when we put the former self in. Yet I would lead my former self by the hand through much of what I would not understand, and so I stumble, and the rain continues on the roof, with such a sound of gently pitying laughter. What this suggests, if we address it to the self, to the former self, but the self nonetheless, is that all of that vigor I once had, it was not misplaced. I'm not willing to say that. Maybe not even willing to say that it was for naught. But certainly it was not rewarded. This poem makes it certain that the former self is not to be rewarded, but the former self is to be instead forgiven. For I would lead my former self by the hand through much of what he would not understand. This is to accept that it was the vagaries of life that let us down and not ourselves. Is that the case? Are we willing to accept that at some point life simply gets to be too much? And the vicissitudes of life, too various. And instead of attacking with vigor, we simply fade away. And in fading away, we do not have to burn out. In fading away, there is very little pain. I don't know. That's rough. But hey, These are the type of discussions that happen here on Strip Coverlet. If you got this far and you are not subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Likes and shares really help me out here on the channel as I try to grow and be able to talk about more literature more often. And be sure to check out that pinned comment down there, because on my other channel I talk about movies, I talk about working out, I talk about all sorts of stuff other than literature, because I do that right here.